Okay, group, you may begin.
Okay. Okay. Hi. We're going to talk about housing affordability. My group is Cody Matthews, Edith Chavez, and me, Carlos Silva. So, who is most impacted? Edith, we talk about this.
Hello. We want to explore the income as a driver of affordability. Who are the lowest income groups? Young people, old people, marginalized groups, people trying to transition up to the housing continuum. Next. People under 30 are less likely to be approved to buy a house. So we have different age groups here, and we see the proportion in each age group. People that is more wealthy is in the yellow, green, and blue colors. However, we can see the age between 20 and 24. It's a big group that is affected by the income to buy a house. Next. Indigenous people have a larger proportion of core housing need. Nunavut really has a crisis. 80% of the houses are in core housing need. And we can see Saskatoon, Yukon, Nunavut, they are the largest affected by it. Next. If we want to buy a house of $669,000 and we apply the stress test, which is 42% max of debt, we see a couple families will earn $102,000. They will pass the stress test, and but if they have to pay housing and childcare for one preschooler, this is the money that they will have left monthly. However, lone parents with $46,000, they won't pass the stress test, and this is the money that they will have left after paying rent or mortgage and one childcare for one preschooler. Here we have the persons with not in the census. We have the household mean in Canada. They won't be approved. This is the money that they have left after these expenses. And people who live in the poverty line, which is half of the median income, they won't pass the stress test, and they will need to borrow $22 for everything else, for every other expense. Next, please. So this is the money that minimum wagers, people that own minimum wage, the money that they have left after paying housing and one preschooler. If they have 2 children, that will be basically impossible to pay. We see Nunavut again has minus $600 a month if they have to pay for these expenses. The better provinces are Alberta, PEI, and Halifax. Well, Halifax is a city, but yes, next, please. Here we have the tax brackets. So again, after housing and one preschooler childcare expense, the tax bracket A, which is between less than 45,000, this is the money that they will have left. We don't have this data, that's why it's this color, but obviously we can see tax bracket C, D, and E, they are okay. B, it's okay. This is if they earn, for example, tax bracket B, if they earn $91,000. So we calculated to the max of the tax bracket. But even in tax bracket A, we calculated at $45,000, and this is what they have left by province. Next, please. The groups that are most at risk, and this has been consistent over the years, it's people that is unattached, people that have no network, and those people is people between 45 and 64 years old. This is the percentage, so they are 30%. The recent immigrants, a recent immigrant is a person that has been living in Canada for less than 10 years. People with disability, lone parents, indigenous people, youth, and this is people that has any of these visual disadvantage, but still are poor. So all these people fall into the first tax bracket. And if you combine recent immigrants with, if let's say we have a recent immigrant that is a lone parent, then the problem grows for that person, it's bigger. Next, please. If we do the calculation by tax brackets, just 8.66% of people can approve for a mortgage. And like the rent and the mortgage for a house of 669, sometimes it's more expensive to rent than to have the mortgage. Having said that, we suggest to have universal childcare for all Canadians and rent to own apartments for the government subsidized housing. So maybe the renters can own a house. Thank you. Next. Now is Carlos, I guess.
Yeah. So what are the consequences of the housing affordability crisis? Okay. According to Canada's population estimates report in July 2020, more people are deciding to move away from big cities. The cities most impacted are Toronto, which reported a net interprovincial migration of 50,000, minus 50,000, and Montreal with minus 24,000. Compared to the last 4 years average, Toronto and Montreal are accelerating their negative interprovincial migration. As Toronto experienced, a 2000 increase in migration, and in the case of Montreal, the increase has almost doubled. You can see here that Montreal, in previous years, the average of the net interprovincial migration was approximately minus 12,000. Now, in the case of Vancouver, it showed a net interprovincial migration of minus 12,000 of movement between other regions, but if it has presented similar negative numbers since 2016. Now, this migration will probably persist while COVID is around us and more people are working from home. It would be interesting to see this report on July 2021 and check the changes in numbers. Probably in the second semester of 2020, this movement increased in these three cities. Now, due to the COVID-19, Canada government launched an economic response plan to minimize the lockdown impact on Canadians' life due to unemployment and the income decrease. The following graph shows the distribution of the extra income per quintile. We can see that Canadians of all income quintiles have experienced an increase in their disposable income. If we compare from this is comparing Q1 to Q3 of 2020 versus the same period in 2019. Now, we can see that the household debt ratio dropped just when the economic response plan was released, which means that people probably use the extra cash to pay some of their debt. But in Q3, the ratio started to increase again, which could be linked to the fact that in this period, lockdown restrictions eased, so people were getting less money from governments. Now, according to different economists, it is good that people earn more money in the pandemic, because with that, they can spend it to help to recover the economy when the pandemic is over. They also stated that these subsidies should aim to help people with less income. Now, housing affordability impacts the spending habits of Canadians. Reviewing the evolution of the distribution in Canadian budgets from 2010 to 2019, spending in shelter and house operations have become more relevant, whereas other categories like transportation and clothing and accessories have a significant drop. Yeah, this is an impact that housing affordability is having in Canadians. Now, another undervalued impact of housing affordability is the incidence on people's health. A person's health and well-being are determined by the social conditions that they have, and housing is one of those conditions. The importance of adequate housing is recognized over the world and is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, living in an adequate house that is in good conditions, that has easy access to public transportation, school, etc., and also it is affordable, would definitely improve people's lives because they can have more money to spend on more important things rather than paying rent or mortgages. And also, they could have more free time for recreation, study, and other important things. Now, we're going to check the impact of COVID-19. Pandemic hit industry differently. We can see in the following graph that the most affected industries in terms of unemployment are all below the average wages, which means that COVID-19 hit harder on people with lower income and, as we mentioned before, who are the ones most affected with housing affordability. Unemployment is decreasing every month, but is still very very below the pre-COVID levels. Now, according to Statistics Canada, the industries most affected by the pandemic are experiencing an employment rebound as restrictions are lifted in different regions. As the labor market enters a second year of recovery from the effects of COVID-19, the level of employment and deployment rate will be important indicators of market conditions. Now,
Thank you. So continuing to look at the impact of COVID on different industries, we have some data here on the capabilities of different industries and their ability to work from home. So you can see that finance and educational services are going to have a lot more capability of working from home and less disruptions. Next slide, please. Looking at the impact on low wage workers versus the rest of the economy, you can see that there was a big drop off from February 2020, that low wage workers experienced a lot more than the rest of the economy, and women experienced a bigger drop off than men in most cases. Next slide, please. Also, depending on the size of the company, the disruptions were bigger. So for large size firms, from 2016 to 2019, as well as 2020 Q1, the hours worked didn't change as much versus small and medium sized firms, which saw a big drop off in the beginning of 2020. Next slide, please. So now we can look at some recommendations for how to deal with housing affordability. So there's a lot of different possibilities. A few ideas would be building additional social housing, giving tax breaks to people purchasing homes, and implementing rent control. And you can look at different countries and see how the housing situation is there and what policies they have implemented to see what we should do in Canada. Next slide, please. So we have a graph here. Canada is the red star on the graph. This graph is measuring percentage of population that's homeless and percentage of housing that's designated for social housing. So you can see a downward trend indicating that the more social housing that there is, there's a decrease in the homeless population. It's a pretty flat trend line, so it's not a very strong relationship, but it is important. Next slide, please. We can look at tax breaks versus reported satisfaction and housing affordability. So once again, Canada is the red star there. And we see that as the larger the tax breaks are, the higher probability that people will be reporting that they're satisfied with housing affordability. Next slide, please. We can look at impact of implementing rent control. So the countries with the red bars there do not have rent control. So you can see that those are in the middle. So whether or not you have rent control, it seems like there's still a lot of eviction proceedings as a percentage of total rents. So that might not be the best policy for addressing that problem. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we're just going to sum up our findings. Next slide. And so looking at who is most impacted, so it's going to be young people and seniors, which have lower income, Indigenous people and recent immigrants. And the reason why they're being impacted more is because they have smaller incomes versus the rising home prices, and they have less employment stability as shown during the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So what happens when they can't afford their housing needs? So they're going to reduce their spending on other aspects of the economy, delay starting families, and you're going to see increased homelessness in your country. And some ways that this can possibly be avoided is increasing the proportion of social housing, reducing taxes on home purchases, and implementing rent control restrictions. Next slide, please. And that's our presentation. So we can take some questions now.
Great. Thank you very much. I will open up the floor to any of the judges who have questions for you.
Great presentation. It was very creative, looking at different data sets. I want to go back to where, I can't remember what slide was it, but I think you guys were looking at household debts and income. And I think my question was, you're right, the CERBs are, people are getting CERBs, so they have more income, and people are not spending their money because the economy is closed. As a result, you will see the decrease in household debt. I know I said the expense and credit card purchases and so forth. As you were thinking about your presentation, was there any part of you were thinking as like, when we are going back to the real life and economy was opening, the household debt is going to go back to normal, but the income stays the same? How can we, as you're looking at your recommendation, how would that look? How would that change? What are some of the things that we can, as a government, they can do to continue helping with that?
Well, that's a good question, because we read that yeah, like the economists were hoping that people with this extra income, they when they started to spending this money, the economy would be active again, and that will create more jobs, and the wages will go up again. But the thing is that as you said at the beginning, it will be difficult, because the benefit that government are paying each time is less money, because people are starting to work again. So it's difficult to predict what is going to happen, but what we have read is that, yeah, that like governments and economies are very confident and very optimistic that this will change for better when the conditions are starting to improve.
Thank you.
I wonder, great presentation, by the way. I was really interested in the tax part of it that you mentioned. And can you give me a little clearer idea of what specific types of taxes you think might influence people's perceptions of affordability? Just maybe go over that for me again. I wasn't totally capturing the logic.
You wanna go back to the slide?
Yeah, that'd be great.
My slide.
Okay. Give me a minute. This one.
Was it?
No, it was one and it had a little red star.
That was one of mine.
Oh, it's one of the. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that one.
This one, right? Okay.
This
Yeah,
one here. So sorry. So what was your question?
I was curious about, you said something about tax breaks and perceptions of affordability. Can you just walk me through the logic of that again?
So the perception of affordability is a survey given to a bunch of different countries, and basically people were asked whether or not they thought or they considered their local housing market to be like affordable. So then the proportion of that of the responses is what's on the y-axis here. So Canada, for example, is around half the respondents would consider their local housing market to be affordable. And then the x-axis here is foregone tax revenue. And this was, it's foregone through different tax policies. For example, one was, it was a reduction in the percentage tax you paid based on your mortgage percentage, I believe it was. But there was a few different policies, and the data source that I got it from just kind of aggregated it to a percentage. Sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm muted. That's really interesting because there's 4 countries that are kind of, there's one cluster and then another cluster of countries, and it'd be interesting to know more about that. What's the data source, incidentally?
OECD. That's for both. They had 2 separate data sets, so they had a lot of data on the satisfaction proportion,
Okay.
but not as much on the tax revenue. So I had to match it up by taking a lot of the data out of the satisfaction proportion data set and only use the ones that we have for the tax revenue data from. So it's pretty small sample, actually, if I were to critique it on that.
Still, yeah, it's still very interesting to see the split. So thanks, appreciate that.
Kelly, were you going to have a question?
Could you go to the one where it showed like the breakdown of what proportion of people's income they were spending on like the different categories in 2010 versus 2019? I'm just
This one.
curious. No, though it was 2 bar graphs. It was like vertical bar graphs, and they had like where it was like transportation, other.
This one, right?
Yes, that one. I'm just
Okay.
curious about like if you had any forecasts that because it only goes to 2019. So like I wonder what you think might have happened in 2020 and like what are the long-term consequences of some of the other trends. So like, you know, you mentioned people moving out of cities, moving to other parts of, you know, the country. Is there anything you could see like connecting to this, like other consequences down the road because of some of these shifts?
Well, yeah, it would be interesting as you said to analyze that, because yeah, people are moving from big cities, which has they tend to pay more in housing, to suburbs where you pay less. But yeah, the thing is that in 2020 we saw a big increment in housing prices, which probably you could say that housing cost and housing rents and mortgages will go up. But the thing is that also mortgage rates have fall. So you have like a mix between those 2 things. Like you have the mix between the increment on house prices and the decrease in mortgage rates. So it's hard to tell if the mortgage rates, the low mortgage rate, will compensate the increase in the house prices. So but yeah, that will be interesting to analyze, because yeah, it's a good point to know if it will compensate the two factors that are the ones that drive the main factors that drive the house price, the house affordability ratio.
Awesome. I just think it's like super interesting when we look longitudinally, like 2010 to 2019, because you hear so much in the news about like the cost of food is going up. Like I've been hearing that for years, but it's then you look and it's the amount we're spending actually hasn't had a huge change. So I just thought that was really interesting numbers to see. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, because yeah, as you said, the food is practically the same proportion in the household spending. The thing is that the income maybe is not keeping the same pace as the housing cost. So that's why that's why shelter and household operation have increased in the distribution of Canadian budget.
All right, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. We have run out of time. So job well done. At this point, I would invite everybody to move over and join presentation 4. Thanks so much, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.